Hi, and welcome to Module 3 of WFED 6270. In this module, we're going to talk about 3 things that work against career and technical education, and actually many things in our lives. And then we're going to talk about marketing research, and then how to collect the information you need to begin to market your program. So there are 3 things that I believe work against career and technical education, and all of them are kind of rooted in psychology. The first one is perceived value. And so we typically put false values on things. A great example would be a 4-year education is deemed to have tremendous value, but that's really dependent on the major. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. Also, false scarcity. There's this notion that jobs in areas that are saturated with job seekers, that there are jobs in these areas. And so we put false scarcity on there, that there's a need for people in certain fields, when in reality there's not, and we do this quite often. And the last one is social proof, and so we're going to talk about these 3 different items. So when we look here at perceived value, we do this in many different ways. One, we tend to put artificial values on everything. We relate unrelatable items. And so let me give you just a couple examples of kind of the type of perceived value that I'm talking about. So here's a great example from a study that was done by a Harvard psychologist. He asked people, would you play this lottery? And the lottery only had 10 tickets in it. It was $1 to play, and it was 20. And if you won $20. And so at that moment, there were 9 tickets that were purchased, and there was 1 more ticket available. And so the question was, would you play this lottery? And the people that typically play lotteries were like, of course. And actually, if you look at Bernoulli's equation, you find that this actually is a pretty good value for a lottery. You've got fairly good odds to win, and you've got a very low investment. So this, if you did play the lottery, would actually be a good lottery to play. Now, of course, it has nothing like, it looks nothing like the real lottery, which is incredibly rare to win. And then he asked them, he gave them a different scenario where he said, okay, it's the same winnings, it's the same amount to play, it's $1 to purchase a ticket. However, rather than 9 people each having 1 ticket, there's a guy named Leroy, and he has all 9 other tickets, and you have 1 ticket. Would you play this lottery? And surprisingly, most people said no on this, that said yes on the first scenario. So once again, they're putting a perceived value on that ticket. The ticket in this particular scenario is worth less to them than the ticket in the other scenario in which everyone had a fair chance to win. That's what I mean by perceived value. And so we see this all the time. You know, would you drive across town to save 50% off of a $200 stereo? And most of us would say, sure, that's probably worth a drive across Kalamazoo. But would you drive across town to save 0.3% on a $33,000 car? Most people would probably say, no, I'm already here at the dealership. What's the big deal? The problem is it's the same amount of money, right? So people are putting perceived value on that amount of money, and the amount of money is the same. It doesn't have a perceived value. It has a definite value. And so what we actually call this is shifting comparisons, and this is done all the time. We do this also when we go to Best Buy and compare TVs. Never in our life will we ever compare the TV we purchase with another TV, ever again. However, in that moment, it seems to be incredibly important that you buy the TV with the best picture. That is why you will see on TVs that they sometimes have a retail setting, which really amps up the contrast and the brightness, right? It's because of this shifting comparison. You're once again putting a value on a TV that will never be there again. We also do all kinds of funky things, such as this study, which asks people, would you rather have $50 now or $60 now? And of course the answer is more is better than less, so $60 now. Would you rather have $60 now or $60 in 1 month? And the answer is, of course, $60 now, because now is better than later. However, in real life, that's not how things work. And so what we see here is, would you rather have $50 now or $60 in 1 month? Most people would choose the $50 now rather than wait for the money. But then when you said, would you rather have $50 in 12 months or $60 in 13 months, since you're forcing them to wait, then their perceived value of waiting is gone up tremendously, and so they would rather wait for the $60 in 13 months. However, what this study found was that after 12 months, they called the participants that said that they would wait the 13 months and said, okay, well, you've waited 12 months, you've only got one more month to wait. Would you like to wait, or we could give you $50 right now? And lo and behold, the majority of them took the $50 right now, right? So we have a really hard time with perceived value. Now, where this comes into play is you've got to wonder, what kind of value do students have perceived about your program? Does it have a perceived value, or is it actually undervalued in the minds of students and parents? And the answer is it's probably undervalued, just so you know. In terms of social proof, this is a very fascinating one that I think about a lot. And that is, in social proofing, people assume the actions of others reflect the correct behavior for a given situation. And so we see these effects in large groups, that they tend to conform to choices which may be either correct or mistaken. And so we call that herd behavior, or herd mentality. And so what this does is this leads to public compliance and private acceptance, even if you know that this is probably not the case, right? So an excellent example that you can go to YouTube right now if you want to and check out is the smoke in the room experiment, where an experimenter brings in someone who thinks that they're going in for a job interview, and so they're filling out some paperwork before the job interview, and they begin to pump smoke into the room. And when the person's alone, they act perfectly rational and do the correct behavior, which is that they leave the room promptly to notify someone that I believe something's on fire. But then what they do is for other participants, they hire what are called confederates, which are people that researchers use, and they essentially are actors. And so they told those confederates or actors to be in the room with that person and pretend like you're filling out the same application for this job interview. However, when the smoke starts to billow into the room, you're going to ignore that smoke. And so here's the one person who's totally clueless is sitting in the room with all those other folks, and they notice the smoke. But the first thing that they do is they look around to see the reactions of others, right? So this is what we call social proofing. And lo and behold, the others pretend like it's not there. They just continue to fill out the application. So what does the person do? Well, in every single time, they delay what they do. So they, in worst case scenario is they never move, and the smoke continues to billow, and they just sit there and suffer like everyone else. In the best case, they're at least delayed a few seconds before they react, because no one else is reacting around them. What I say is that this is what's happening in career and technical education many times, is that you've got students that are looking around the room and none of their colleagues are taking your courses. They're not taking any courses at the technical center. And so they're following the herd. And what we have to try to do is modify social proof. We've got to make them realize that they need to break away from the herd and take our courses. So I encourage you to look up social proofing. It's a fascinating concept, and it is so very true. And we are all guilty of it in some way or the other. You see someone slip and fall on the ice. After your first reaction to giggle, do you go help them? Well, that's highly dependent upon the people around you. Do they help? Most of us will help if other people help. If people ignore that person, we are more likely to ignore them. Once again, we're looking towards the herd for validation. This is one of the reasons why 90-something% of people in some high schools go to college. It's not because they all want to go to college, it's because they don't know any better. They look around and everyone in their graduating class is going to college. And we know from statistics that a lot of those people will not graduate from college. And so you wonder if they've made the right choice following the herd. So how do we modify social proof? Well, we modify social proof three different ways. One could be if someone identifies an authority. So if one if one considers themselves an authority. So if one perceives themselves as an authority figure, they'll less likely follow the group's behavior. So if we empower students to make their own choice, then they are less likely to follow the herd. The second one is smart money. So following the path of certain people within the group because you believe they know more about stuff, right? So a common way to look at this is diners and truckers. Ask the trucker where the best diner is. So you're following the smart money. You ask someone that made a lot of money in the stock market, how did you make money in the stock market, right? Well, you want to be that smart person. You want to come off in your marketing as being the one that's got it figured out. My program is a way to get a job, right? And then the last one is possession of special knowledge. So if one perceives that he or she is better advised about a situation than a surrounding group, then he or she is less likely to follow that group. So once again, in our marketing, what we're trying to do is educate people, give them special knowledge that others don't have, right? So like that little tidbit about 83% of people with associate's degree earn just as much as those with bachelor's degree. That is an excellent example of what I'm talking about here. That's special knowledge that you're giving them. So there's probably special knowledge about your program, that your program leads to nearly 100% enrollment in a specialized community college program, or it leads to nearly 100% of the students becoming certified before they leave high school in this thing, right? So we're giving them special knowledge that they didn't possess. Now, another thing I want you to think about, and all this kind of relates to what are you going to try to collect with information, right? So the stuff I'm telling you about social proofing, the stuff I'm telling you about perceived value or a perceived lack of value, this is all stuff that you're going to use to start collecting ammo. This is kind of the background stuff here that I want you to kind of be thinking about. And another thing I want you to think about, there was a book I read a while back called The 48 Laws of Power, and you've probably heard about it. It's been around for a while, and so it's a book that some people think is great and other people think is incredibly amoral. And when you look through the book, I can realize why people think it's amoral. I mean, it's written definitely from a ruthless business perspective, right? These are the laws you need to follow in order to become powerful, right? And so just to give you an example of some of the laws, never put too much trust in your friends and learn how to use your enemies, okay? That is one of the 48 laws. So you can kind of see what we're talking about here. Conceal your true intentions. Infection, avoid the unhappy and unlucky. I actually like that one because you need to stay away from those unhappy and unlucky teachers. Discover each man's weakness and find a way to manipulate it, right? So that's what I mean by how some people look at this book as very amoral, all right? But as I was reading through it, and I agree, it is pretty amoral, there was one that really struck me in terms of marketing a program, and that is to play to people's fantasies. And I really started thinking about that. That's exactly what we try to do in marketing. We try to play to people's dreams, their ideals, the concepts in their head that make them happy. That's the whole point of marketing, is to play to people's fantasies. And so I started thinking about, well, what fantasies do high school students possess about their future, right? And what are their parents' fantasies about their child's future? These are the things that we have to think about marketing, right? So there are certain things that are wonderful about our program, but they don't really appeal to an individual student. And then there are certain things that we can mention about our program that we know would appeal to students. And that's what we're talking about here, is you want to play to those fantasies. And so when we think about student fantasy, you can use a different word if you don't like fantasy, but that's just the word that I use because it came from the book. I start to think about, one, they want to do something post-secondarily. I mean, for the most part, there's always a few that really don't want any more schooling, but some of them want something other than just a high school education. They want to have a job with some type of work-life balance, or at least make enough money to have really cool stuff. And in career and technical education, we can provide that. Maybe not the work-life balance, because many of our areas are in very high demand, and so these people are working a lot longer than they should work because of the lack of supply of workers. However, they want to know that they have a potential to have a work-life balance or a pretty sweet life. And they also want to have a career that provides meaning. And so we've got to think about that when we're marketing as well. We know that millennials and the generation that's coming after, the millennials both want careers that have some type of meaning. They want the hero type jobs, and we've got to make sure that in our marketing we show our program has that type of job. And they want to have a career that pays well, obviously, like I've already mentioned. Now, when it comes to parents, one, they want them out of the house, right? But they also want them to go to college. They want their child to be successful. I mean, very rarely do you have a parent that doesn't want this, although it does exist. And they want them to choose a career that will enable them to be successful. And so I'll show you how we can kind of mess around with that in our marketing. So really, what does this mean for us as teachers and as marketers? Well, one is we've got to think about immediate fantasies, and we got to think about long-term fantasies. So the immediate student fantasies, they want to finish high school. They want to have a good time. They want to find meaning and relevance, and they're not probably finding it in high school at this moment. High school does a terrible job at making things have meaning and be relevant to a high schooler. They want to please themselves. They want to please others, including their parents, although they'll never admit it. And they want to get an early start on college. Many of our programs can help with all this, right? And so this is the type of stuff that we may want to immediately be trying to highlight and market. Now, some of the long-term stuff that's probably going to appeal, it would appeal to students, obviously, like salary and demand. But really, the long-term stuff, I feel like that's really going to turn on parents and business and industry and community leaders and administrators. But it's also important for students. So you're going to want to know the labor market demand. So you're going to be looking up the Michigan, Bureau of Labor Statistics information. You're going to be looking at, which you can, by the way, you can find county by county job demand statistics and projections. And that's all good stuff for most of our programs, because most of our programs are high demand areas and also are high wage. You're looking for stuff like potential salary, post-secondary educational opportunities. So related job opportunities, links to colleges and trade schools, the minimum and maximum careers in education. And this is something that I want to talk about. So we want to play to their fantasy, but we want to educate them. And I think what's really, really important is that we show them, because this is a major hindrance to parents, is that they think if they send their kid to a technical center or they send them and make them a CTE concentrator, that they are somehow limiting their educational opportunity. And in every single one of our areas, we know that potentially is not the case. You could look at health occupations for an example. Yes, maybe a lot of those people do become nurses or CNAs. However, that is still an avenue or an opportunity to maybe go deeper into the medical field, such as becoming a physician's assistant or a doctor, right? So we need to make sure that they know that we do have those career opportunities, right? And we need to tell them, what does that mean salary-wise, right? So we can do all this, and I'll show you some posters when we get to that point where we can start to kind of give this information to them textually, right? Where we're saying, here are the potential careers, and here are the median or the average salaries for these particular types of jobs, so that they can see that there is a track towards continuing education. Now, while we know in our heart of hearts that most of the people that go through your program are not going to need to do that, because what we find is that labor market demand peaks at some point in many of our areas. So like, for example, in welding, having a certificate of completion in welding will give you certain types of labor market demand. I mean, there'll be more of a demand for jobs and a certain type of salary. Having an associate's degree may increase that. Going through an apprenticeship program may increase that. But when you get to a bachelor's degree, such as a welding engineering bachelor's degree, that may be the peak, And so this chart right here may be exactly what we're talking about. After the bachelor's degree, your job demand and salary is going to start to go down. Because there's not really a lot of need for people with master's degrees and PhDs in welding. Who knows, So just to give you an example, I think this is what we're doing. We're showing them the fantasy, but we're also educating them. And as long as parents and students understand that taking our career and tech ed courses does not mean you're limiting your educational career or your educational opportunity, then I think they'll be more accepting to walk in the door, and then we can wow them with our instruction. Okay, so now that you get an idea of kind of the basis on why we want to market, the things that are working against us, and how do we play that to our favor, then we've got to start thinking about how do you collect the information. Well, there's many different places that you can go to collect the information. I mean, you can, and these links are links that I found a while back, and obviously I can't show them to you right now. But you can go to Google, and Google has a news link, and so you can just sit there and put in all the information you want to put in, such as like welding shortage, and put it in there, and the Google News will find articles related to welding shortage. You also are going, and so what you're doing is you're going to read those articles, and you're going to kind of pull out data that probably they mention in the article. The state of Arizona expects to have the need for 100,000 more welders by 2026 or something like that. And so what you're doing is you're kind of pulling that data, and then you're going to use that in your different marketing materials, right? Or you may just use the entire article to share with parents or students. You're also going to want to look at what's called the BLS. If you put in Google BLS, you're going to get it, but it's also called the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And in there, they have, for the entire country, kind of labor market demand. They also have all types of information about the types of jobs you can get, the types of education that's needed, the work environment. You want to make sure that you are up to date with all that information, and you're collecting that information because it may become important to use in your marketing, because many of our programs have incredible labor demand shortages. The Michigan Labor Market Information, I believe that's what that acronym stands for, .org, is a great place to find your county by county labor market demand information. So I encourage you to look there, and also look for your county or surrounding counties to find out what kind of demand or what kind of shortage you may have of workers in your particular area. Another great place is that Career One Stop, and I encourage you to look at it. But also the College Navigator site. If you put in something like NCES College Navigator into Google, you'll find it. What's great about that is not only do you need to be kind of researching and trying to find information related to the news that's out there about the shortage and the data that's about the shortage, you also need to make sure that you're doing the right type of research on the colleges that you're promoting for your program. And I highly encourage you to look at that, because you may be surprised at the information that's there. So look at the College Navigator site. Find one of the universities that you typically, or a college that you typically send students to or recommend students to go, and look at stuff such as, are they accredited? Look at stuff such as their graduation rate, their acceptance rate, so that you are kind of up to date on that type of information. Here's just a few articles that I pulled a while back. Here's one about police facing severe shortages of recruits, and so this has plenty of good ammo that you can use if you're a criminal justice instructor, right? Here's more. So this is what I mean by going like to Google News and then just trying to find articles, and then you can click on the articles and read them. Here's one about the Virginia State Police are strained by a trooper shortage, right? Here's one that talks a little bit more broadly about the surprising global shortage of skilled workers, which shouldn't be a surprise to anybody with too many kids going to college. Here's one, like if you were a teacher cadet teacher, talking about Arizona facing a shortage of skilled or educated labor. It's probably because they don't pay that great, but nonetheless. So this is the type of information that you could be pulling, and within here. It says something here like, just trying to read, of course it's hard to read it. The Georgetown University Center on Education and Workforce calculates that by 2020, 65% of job vacancies nationwide will require some type of post-secondary education and training. All right, so it's just there's just all kinds of good little nuggets of information that the journalists have pulled, and so that's the type of stuff that I'm talking about. You need to try to find, and the purpose of the assignment this module will be to do that stuff. So how do you utilize this information? Well, it can be utilized in brochures and posters. On the website, you can use this information and in informational sessions that you do in front of the Chamber of Commerce or in front of students or in the lunchroom. You can share this information with your current students because that just validates why they are deciding to take their electives and use them in your program. You can share it with you can talk about it in general conversations, and so I'm always when people ask me what I do and we start getting on the subject career and technical education, I'm always harking back to some of the statistics that I've learned over the years, such as nationwide there's a 200,000 worker shortage in welding. That the average welder is about 55 years old, right? This is the type of information that I collected a long time ago that's still relevant and that I share when talking in appropriate conversations. So, what is it that I'm asking you to do for this particular module? I want you to go collect some background information, some of that stuff that we've talked about. And so I've given you kind of somewhat specific directions of what to do. You're going to go to either the national site or the state site and locate at least 3 pieces of information that will help you entice students and parents into selecting your program. Then I want you to go to the Occupational Outlook Handbook and find at least one profession within your area, within all levels of your career pathway. And so, to clarify, if you're a marketing teacher, you want to find information about entry-level positions, mid-level positions, and high-level positions. And so you've got those 3 levels. And I want you to find A, B, C, D, and E for all those 3 levels. That's what number 2 is asking. And then number 3, I want you to find 3 related news articles that have something to do with your area that paints it in a positive way. Either it truly is a positive type of article, or it's an article that has great information about the shortage that you may be having in your area. And then I want you to identify 5 of your top post-secondary institutions for your program. Where are your students going? What would be the best places for them to go? And I also don't want you to limit it to Michigan, okay? If there's a better place and it happens to be out of state, but you know that if students go there, they will it's basically going to sign their ticket for the rest of their life. That's the place I'm talking about, okay? So you can have a few realistic post-secondary institutions on here. Maybe it's your local community college, but I want to see that you're actually looking for the top-notch places. Okay, so then you're going to fill out the information for those 5. And where you're going to go to do that is that College Navigator site. So thanks for listening, and I hope you are able to complete this assignment successfully. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me.